Pastor Andy Stanley and his wife Sandra traveled down to St. Thomas with two other couples for one of those picture-perfect vacations. It was one of those times when they had an all-exclusive package that included a boat, a skipper, and a cook, and a 65-foot sailboat. On their last night, the skipper brought them into a beautiful cove, and oddly enough, he tied off 4 lines from the boat to these giant mangrove roots on the shore. Now, they thought that was strange because the night before, he'd only dropped off a single anchor from the bow of the boat. And while the couples were swimming in the idyllic water, then he dropped off a huge anchor, swam it out, down a couple hundred feet, and set it with a chain and a rope. He kept doing this again and again until the 65-foot sailboat had 8 lines out in perfect glassy water. Of course, they wondered, what is Popeye getting into at this point? What is he thinking about? Well, the fact is that the skipper had been listening to the weather report, and Hurricane Marilyn was barreling down upon St. Thomas Island with the winds of 125 miles an hour and gusts up to 145 miles per hour. By 8 p.m., the whole sky was dark, and by 9 o'clock, the hurricane hit. And it tossed that boat in every direction imaginable. Now, the next morning, they discovered the disasters. 2 fire stations were completely annihilated. The hospital on St. Thomas was evacuated. Hundreds of boats sank. $1.5 billion worth of damage was done, and 8 lives were lost. But Andy and those on the little sailboat were safe because of the foresight of a skipper who would not think everything is idyllic when he could see the signs of a coming storm on the horizon. That skipper was unlike our character, Lot. Lot failed to see the coming hurricane in Sodom and Gomorrah. At first, life looked like a picture-perfect vacation to Lot in chapter 13 and verse 10. He lifted up his eyes. He saw the lush Jordan Valley, the lovely watered plain, and he thought, that's a great place for my St. Thomas vacation. And so he set his bearings toward what he thought were beautiful cities. And everything looked like smooth sailing ahead. Lot should have been paying attention to the darkening skies and the increasing winds that came in Genesis 14, when Lot and all the citizens of Sodom were swept into captivity by enemy kings. That should have been a sign to open his eyes. Hey, but what the heck? Uncle Abraham stepped in and rescued Lot, so he thought nothing of it. And he did not drop off a single anchor of faith. He just kept swimming in the idyllic sea of Sodom. Genesis 18, God told Abraham, the hurricane is coming. I'm going to arrive in Sodom, and I'm going to wipe out those wicked cities. And last week, we saw the hurricane as it was beginning to brew. We began with the invitation. And there, with the invitation, we saw that Lot invited into the town, or into his house, the angels who came by to announce the coming destruction that was headed for that city. Now, the invitation degenerated to the attempted molestation. As you recall, all the men of the sea gathered together because they wanted to rape the angels. They thought they were men. And the angels supernaturally sent a blindness upon them, so they were groping for the door and unable to get in. And then that attempted molestation led to what we saw was the hesitation. And the hesitation was first on the part of the sons-in-law. They laughed at Lot. They said, you can't be telling the truth. We don't know who this God is, and we don't believe he's going to destroy the city. So last week we left you with the first part of the hesitation on the part of the sons-in-law. Today we look at the second part of the hesitation, and that is hesitation by a scared Lot. Verses 15 and the beginning of verse 16. When morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your daughters who are here. You will be swept away in the punishment of the city." But Lot hesitated. He didn't listen to the voice of God. He didn't respond to the warning of the angels, because a lingering Lot did not want to leave the city he so desperately loved. Now, 2 Peter 2:8 says he was a believer, but you would never guess it. In fact, if I didn't have 2 Peter 2:8 in my Bible, I wouldn't bet a plug nickel that Lot was saved. There was absolutely no indication from his lifestyle, which tells me he was the classic incarnation of what we call the carnal Christian. The person who takes salvation as life insurance. I prayed the prayer, I went forward, I became a Christian, but I'm not giving any part of my life to God. I just use that as fire insurance when I die. That's exactly how Lot was living his life. Lot was not committed to the principles of God. His future was on his fleshly priorities. His home meant more to him than his spiritual health. Over 100 years ago, the old Scottish preacher Alexander MacLaren wrote, "Lot has either formed or he's going to form marriage alliances for his daughters with men of the city who are just as dark as the rest. Maybe his wife, whom the story will not name, for pity or for horror, was a sodomite herself. To escape meant to leave all of this and his wealth behind. If Lot goes out, he goes out a pauper. So his heart, which is where his treasure is, makes his movements slow." What insanity his lingering must have seemed to the angels. And then he writes, "I wonder if we, who cling so desperately to the stuff of the world, who are so slow to go where God would have us to go for our own spiritual safety, if we would lose anything of the world's wealth, if we seem much wiser to eyes made clear-sighted with the wisdom of heaven." I wonder if angels look down upon us today, shaking their heads, wondering, why are they grabbing for that home? Why are they clinging to that car? Why are they hanging on to that 401k? Don't they know it's going to burn? Don't they know they can't take it with them? They should be focused on their spiritual health, on that which is eternal. But I guess it all depends on how big the world is to you, doesn't it? The renowned astronomer Sir Robert Ball said that a man who could carry one sack of corn on this earth could easily carry 6 sacks of corn on a globe as small as the moon. But if somehow you could get to the sun or reach a planet as large as the sun, tugging at a pocket watch and pulling it out of your pocket would be pulling at a weight of 6 pounds. You would find it difficult just to lift your arm. And if you lie down, you'd never be able to get up on your own. The bigger the world, the bigger the attraction. And the question of the hour, how big is this world to you today? If God said, flee, if God said, leave it all, would you be able to up and move out? Not Lot. Lot lingered. And so the angels grabbed him. They said, we're going. Verse 16. So the man what? Seized his hand and the hand of his wife and the hands of his 2 daughters, because the compassion of the Lord was upon him. And they brought him out, outside the city. I like the way John Phillips puts it. We can picture the scene, Lot being drugged out of Sodom, the whole family dallying and dawdling on the way out. The wife wanting to sort out her jewelry, the daughters wanting to get suitably dressed, Lot looking for his bank book and list of accounts receivable, grabbing all the gusto. What can I take? What can I get? And not thinking about their destiny and their future. verses 17 to 18. Well, when the angels brought them outside, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you. Do not stay anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, or you will be swept away." But Lot said, "Oh no, my lords. Oh no, my lords." Escape! And you can see the whining Lot. "I can't. I'm too weak." Big carnal baby that he is. He claims that the evil that God is delivering him from will overcome him. Why? Because he knows in his heart he's not walked with God. And he knows that he deserves to die in that city, like all the rest of those people. It's his lack of faith and it's his fear of judgment that's making him make that statement. And so he offers a presumptuous plea. Verse 20. "Now behold, this town is near enough to flee to, and it's small. Please let me escape there, is it not small, that my life may be spared." Man, Lot, you are really pushing it, aren't you? And sometimes when you push too hard, you could lose it all. It's like a man who was on a 10th story at a window about ready to leap from the building to take his life in the deep south. And a passerby saw him, and he said, "Don't do it, man. Think of your mother." He said, "My mom died 5 years ago." He said, "Well, then think of your father." He goes, "I've never known my father." "Well, then think of your wife." He said, "I've never been married." And the man said, "Well, then think of Robert E. Lee." And the fellow said, "Robert E. Lee, who's he?" The guy said, "Never mind, Yankee. Go ahead and jump." Sometimes you push too hard and you could lose it all. God's grace, God's compassion, God's kindness, God's forgiveness is available to you, but you keep playing games with God, and at one point he'll pull back. You remember the Bible teaches us about Pharaoh, that it says Pharaoh hardened his heart, and Pharaoh hardened his heart, and Pharaoh hardened his heart, and then the final statement, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Now that's a scary place to be. If the grace of God is there for your life and you keep laughing at it, you keep lingering, you keep pushing away, and you keep hardening your heart, eventually God will harden your heart, and there's no way you will ever get to heaven. Don't spit in the face of God's grace. Lot's dangerously close to doing that at this point. He has no idea what he's in for. Well, God condescends to his weakness because he's gracious. He said to him in verse 21, "Behold, I grant you this request also, not to overthrow the town of which you've spoken. Hurry, escape there. I cannot do anything until you arrive there." So the name of the town was called Zoar. Zoar. The sun had arisen over the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Once the Lord has lassoed a lingering Lot and got him out of the city, he could step up and do what he needs to do. And that's our fourth point, and that is the devastation. Verses 24 to 25. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord and out of heaven. He overthrew those cities, all the valley, all the inhabitants of the cities, and even what grew on the ground. Now, it's been suggested that God could have used a natural means with a supernatural sense of timing to produce this devastating display of divine fireworks. It's possible that God triggered an earthquake along a great fault which released to the atmosphere vast quantities of combustible hydrocarbons and sulfur, which we know today abound in that region. And if an earthquake released those carbons and God sent lightning at the same time, it would have caused a colossal explosion and phenomenal fire. Therefore, the fire and brimstone that fell from heaven could be the burning gas and sulfur that was blown into the air from the explosion and came back to the cities. Or God just rained fire from heaven like he did in 1 Kings chapter 18 with Elijah. It doesn't make any difference how God did it. Either way, it worked. And it worked perfectly. If you've seen pictures of that area around the Dead Sea, you would be amazed at the barren desolation that marks that section of geography. It's been a perfect picture of the permanent judgment of God for thousands of years for every eye that looks at that. Because don't forget, it was once just like Eden. It was called the Garden of the Lord. And now it's desolate because these people went against God. It says here that God overthrew the cities. That statement, to overthrow, is used repeatedly in the Bible to speak of divine destruction. And it's interesting, only that which stands up could be overthrown. It's a picture of the citizens saying, we don't believe you, God. We're not going to follow your principles of purity. We will do whatever we want. And God was gracious, but eventually he wiped every single individual off the face of the earth in one quick swoop. And that's exactly how it's going to be during the great tribulation that could be right around the corner. The rapture could occur at any moment. And when his church is swept to heaven, hell on earth will begin like Sodom and Gomorrah. We learned that last week, did we not? Is Jesus said that's exactly how it's going to be at the coming of the Son of Man. So we're going to see, at least unbelievers will, the same picture someday. Look at verse 26. But his wife from behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Remember what they said in verse 17? Do not look behind you. She said, I'm not going to listen to that. No one tells me what to do. And so she died. She disobeyed because lingering looks were forbidden by God. Lingering looks were forbidden for two reasons. Number one, it would delay their departure. Number two, it would divide their hearts. Her heart was divided. She's still wishing for Sodom. And so she's singing the old song, I left my heart in Sodom, Francisco. You know, she's looking back to the place where she loves, where sin is just prolific. And God said, that's it for you. He took her life. Now what happened to her? Well, it's possible that she was covered by the molten materials that rained down on her, and she became petrified like salt, just like the citizens of Pompeii and Herculaneum in 79 AD, those Roman towns in which we have evidence of that type of look. It's very interesting that those who have gone to the southwest shore of the Dead Sea have actually seen numerous salt rock formations. And many of them look like a human being. And tourists will go there and say, look, there's Lot's wife. No, she's over here. You're both wrong. She's over here. We don't know if that's Lot's wife, but it's possible that one of those formations could be her petrified today. The Bible simply says she looked back and turned into a pillar of salt. Sunday school teacher had just spoken those words to his class. Little girl raised her hand and said, well, once my mommy was driving and she looked back and turned into a telephone pole. Little different, but none the wiser. Hey, the Lord has a comment on this catastrophe. Listen to what Jesus says. Luke 17:32. Remember Lot's wife. And then he says, whoever seeks to keep his life will certainly lose it. Lot's wife. Whoever loses his life for my sake will gain it. That's Abraham. That's Abraham. You know, Abraham did not keep a tenacious grip on his life, on his loot, or on his land. He said, everything I have is yours. And God said, guess what? When I destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, your next door neighbors, I won't touch you. Abraham lost nothing in the devastation. Lot lost everything. Some time ago, one of the world's wealthiest women separated herself from her family. She owned a 45-room mansion in Manhattan. Could you imagine what that would cost? In Manhattan, the most expensive piece of property in the United States of America. 45 rooms with all kinds of expensive art. But she spent the last 2 years of her life in a small rented hospital room, trying to stay away from a family who was embroiled in a constant argument over who was going to get what when Grandma died. And her last words were these: money is poison. Money is poison. She had it in plenty, but it was disproportionate to what she needed the most. Her soul was left empty. You know, Lot had plenty. Now his pocketbook is empty. And now his wife is a tragic memory. Verses 27 to 29. Now Abraham arose early in the morning. He went to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the valley, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the Lord ascended like the smoke of a furnace. Thus it came about, when God destroyed the cities of the valley, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which he lived. Don't forget that phrase. It means everything. God remembered Abraham. And you recall what we mentioned to you 2 weeks ago. The only reason some backslidden believers are not yet dead is because somewhere there's a saint praying for mercy for their soul. Somewhere, someone's offering that person up in prayer, saying, God, give them a second chance. There are people that I'm praying for every single week. Protect them, Lord. Watch over them. Sequester them from harm. Bring circumstances, change things in their life, break things down, bring them to their knees until they finally understand who you are. And God in his compassion allows them to live. They would die. Lot should have died there. But God remembered Abraham. That's why Lot was saved. And he escaped with his 2 daughters. But escape is really a questionable term, because it really wasn't much of an escape. In fact, what these girls do tells me they would have been better off dead. For the seductive maneuver that they pull off in the next few verses brought untold misery to Israel for many, many years. That's the final point on your outline today. We simply call it the degradation. Verse 30. Lot went up from Zoar. The residents of Zoar resented him. You know why? Hey, all of our friends died in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Why didn't you die, Lot? Maybe you had something to do with the Holocaust. So they start putting the pressure on Lot, so he has to now escape from the town which God never wanted him to go to in the first place. Very interesting. He stayed in the mountains, and his 2 daughters with him, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. So Lot stayed in the cave with his 2 daughters. Then the firstborn said to the younger, "Our father's old. There's not a man on earth to come in to us after the manner of the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine." Here's what's interesting. They lost all their possessions, but somehow they managed to salvage a jug of red Whipple wine. Amazing what we save in those last moments, isn't it? Verse 32. "Let us lie with our father, that we may preserve our family through our father." You can take the girls out of Sodom, but you can't take Sodom out of the girls, can you? Interesting, even in the mountains, miles removed from the city, they still maintain the malignant mindset. You've heard it before. The end justifies the means. Doesn't make any difference what I'm doing right now. If the goal in the end is good, then the process to get there may be okay. Not true. We want a baby boy. Our daddy will give us one. Let's get the old skunk drunk. Verses 33 to 35. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with their father, and he did not know when she lay down or when he was arose. On the following day, the firstborn said to the younger, "Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve our family through our father." Tricked twice by the ghetto girls. They pickle old Pop, and they play off his emotions. He's lost everything. Here, Dad, why don't you just drown your sorrows in this jug of save-on wine and drink, 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 and Lot participated very nicely, thank you. Then they prostitute their virginity. Some commentators say, well, they were afraid they weren't going to get married. They're just trying to keep up the family name, which is nonsense because God didn't wipe out the world. They just went to Zoar. There were citizens there. And on top of that, if this activity was so tame, why did they have to turn Lot into a lush to sleep with him? Well, that doesn't make any sense at all to me. This incestuous relationship, having sex with your own daughters, was just as sick as every other ridiculous relationship that came out of Sodom. And I tell you this morning, if America continues to applaud the perversions that it does, and the Supreme Court continues to grant approval to that, this will be the next step. This will be the next step. Directly after the recent decision that the Supreme Court made, there was a man, 1 week later, who approached the court and said, if that's true, can I not marry my son and have sex with him because we want to have a relationship together? It's coming because this world has walked away from God. And we're moving towards Sodom and Gomorrah real quickly in this mentality. Verse 36. Thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. First, Lot's faith was corroded. Now the family is corrupted. Verses 37 and 38. The firstborn bore a son, called his name Moab. He's the father of the Moabites to this day. As for the younger, she also bore a son, called his name Ben-Ammi. He's the father of the sons of Ammon to this day. Moabites and Ammonites, great people. Pebble in Israel's sandal, a thorn in their side, a splinter in their finger. They were a constant source of irritation to everything that Israel did in the years to come. Numbers 25, Balak, king of Moab, secured Balaam's services in an attempt to curse the people of God. And when the curse didn't work and God turned it into a blessing, he went to the king of Moab and said, I know how to trick him. We'll get the most seductive ladies of Moab and send them down to the Israelite camp, and they will sleep together and create perversion. And that's exactly what happened. That's what Moab gave Israel. The Ammonites were wanderers, nomadic folks who sought every opportunity to side with Israel's enemies. And they came out of the loins of Lot, Abraham's nephew. You know, Lot started off pretty well, didn't he? He left the high life of the Ur of the Chaldees to follow Uncle Abraham on a journey of faith to a new place called Canaan. He had a sterling beginning, but he had a tragic ending. And there are many people, there are hundreds, without exaggeration, hundreds that I've personally known in the past 50 years who have followed the train of Lot. Hundreds of people I have known in 5 churches over 50 years who have made commitments to Christ, who once made a decision for the Lord, and have walked away and followed, at least in the train of Lot, if not worse. And the reason that has happened and can happen to any one of us today is based on a principle that we hinted at last week. And here it is, our closing consideration. If you slip spiritually, it will occur slowly, not suddenly. That's Satan's tactic. He doesn't come at you fast and furious. He's way too wise for that. He's speaking to you today slowly. He's coming at you subtly. He's asking you just to give in a little bit in an area which you would have never given into a few years ago. That's how he works with all of us. See, Lot looked towards Sodom. Lot chose Sodom. Lot moved to Sodom. And then Lot is sitting in a judicial seat of Sodom. Now, because we read those phrases from Genesis 13 to Genesis 19 in a moment's notice, we make the assumption it occurred over weeks or months. Here's the truth. It was 25 years. It was a quarter of a century between the time Lot looked and the time he sat in Sodom. That's how slow, that's how gradual spiritual slippage occurs. So it is for the Christian who says, I'm going to take a trip down carnality lane, and I'll be back, maybe. You could take a frog and put that little creature into a beaker of water. Beneath the beaker, put a Bunsen burner on an extremely low flame. And then you raise the flame 0.017 degrees Fahrenheit per second. And you keep doing that second after second. 2 hours later, the frog will have boiled to death. And that frog will never leap or jump. All you have to do is turn the flame very slowly. One author writes these words: no building suddenly crumbles. No tree suddenly falls. No church suddenly splits. No marriage suddenly breaks down. No Christian suddenly becomes base. Imperceptibly, certain things are accepted that were once rejected. Things once considered hurtful are now secretly tolerated. At the outset, it appears harmless, even exciting, but the wedge that it brings will leave a gap that grows wider and wider as moral erosion joins hands with spiritual decay. And then it's gone. I experienced decay firsthand a number of years ago when I was first attending Talbot Theological Seminary. One of my teeth was in need of a root canal. It got so bad that anytime I drank anything hot or cold, it absolutely sent me through the roof. I remember one night I was invited over to a couple's house, and after dinner she served coffee. I took one sip, screamed, and ran out of the house. She looked at her husband and said, I knew my coffee wasn't that great, but she had no idea what I was going through. Do you know that up to that point in my life, I had never flossed my teeth? Never. They say you're supposed to take 2 minutes, and I do now, and have been for decades, to carefully brush your teeth. I did it in about 15 seconds. And I had not been to see a dentist for a teeth cleaning in over 5 years. And the decay got so bad that it led to disaster. Let's bow our heads today. Are you drifting in your devotion to the Lord or to the church that He loves? Would you say I'm slowly slipping spiritually? Maybe it's evident in the look that is cruel. Maybe it's seen in the language that is corrupt. Or perhaps in the lifestyle choice that you're making that is less than clean. God would like you to come to terms with it today. And so right there where you're seated, you could talk to the Lord about your life. You could have an honest one-on-one with Him. And say, Father, slippage stops right now. I will release this sin, I will confess it to you, and I will begin afresh by walking close to your Son today. Take a moment in the quietness and do that right now. You know, it's possible that you're present today, but you're not really a child of God. There was never a time when you seriously made a decision to give your whole heart and soul and your whole life to the Lord Jesus Christ. This would be an excellent time to make that decision. And if God's speaking to your heart, and if He's drawing you by His grace to step into His kingdom today, and you want that relationship with His Son, then we could pray together, and that reality can take place at this moment in time. You could demonstrate that by lifting up your right hand good and high, and that lifted hand says, Lord, today for the first time now, I'm giving my life to you. So if that's your desire, I invite you to lift your hand at this time. God bless you, my friend. God bless you so much. Thank you. Bless you, brother. Thank you. If you just quietly pray with me as I pray this prayer today. Dear Father in heaven, I know that I have sinned and made mistakes in my life. But you are a God of grace, and you reached out to me through the love of Jesus Christ and His death on the cross. Father, I believe that Jesus died for my sins, and I believe that He rose from the grave to prove that He is God. And I believe that if I ask you for forgiveness, you will cleanse me completely. And so right now, I ask to become your son in the faith. Forgive my sins. Accept me as your precious child. It's my desire to spend my life living for you. This is my prayer. Thank you for making me your child today. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.